unstuck. I know that we're all freaked out right now because the SBA just released their first guidance on how to fill out the PPP loan forgiveness, and 11 pages. It's nuts. I have here with me today probably one of the best experts in this area. It's Ami Kassar, who's with Multifunding. Ami, welcome to the show.
Barry, pleasure to be with you as always, my friend.
So, I'm good. So first of all, why does this loan application have to be so complicated?
Well, it has to be so complicated because they have to fill in all the loopholes. And for every way someone's trying to not, use the system to their advantage, and, they have to think of every contingency for someone who wants to hire their uncle or their aunt or do this or do that or squeeze this payment in or that payment in. So it's 11 pages because they have to fill every loophole. The good news is that if you really followed the intent of the law and you did exactly what you had done in the prior time last year, it really shouldn't be that complicated. But if you made changes to your payroll or changed up people or time or employees or this or that, or had furloughed people that didn't come back, or it's going to get tricky.
So Ami, do you think that the lenders will have their own electronic forms that might help in this process?
I think some will and some won't, depending on their size and what they're willing to invest in the technology. I think this is going to be much tougher on the lenders than processing the applications was. But I do think most people are going to have to go to their CPA or their financial advisor for help in getting this done. I don't think most businesses are going to be able to do this by themselves.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I've looked at all the different forms, and I almost think that you got to fill out the forms in reverse. You got to fill out the worksheet first, then the Schedule A, then the whole thing, because they all nest with each other. Should people, as you said, you think they should go to their accountant? I also noticed that the AICPA also has like a Excel template that's out there to help people fill it in.
Yeah, I think you should likely go to your accountant. I mean, you can collect all the information, but there might be some decisions you make about where goes what. There might be some things you're reading wrong. It's pretty darn complicated, and it's likely worth a couple hours of professional advice to make sure you get it right.
Now, I had some hope where we were just going to be able to self-certify all this stuff and we wouldn't have to fill out all these forms, because it seems like it's a lot of work on the small business owner and a big burden on them, considering they really should be spending time running their business. But you think the government has to do this to protect themselves from fraud, which will ultimately come from some of the people that got the money.
Yeah, I was hoping that the government would perhaps consider, under certain amounts or whatever it is, just offering, an automatic forgiveness of X%. If you don't want to go through all the hassle. We haven't seen that yet. Again, I'll just keep reiterating to people that this is still going to keep, the greatest likelihood is that this is still going to keep changing.
Right. And one of the things that might change is when the funds have to be used by, right? Which right now is June 30th.
Yeah, well, not when they have to be used by. You can
Right.
theoretically use it when the time that you can get them forgiven for might change. So there's the time we're talking right now, legislation going through Congress to expand that to 4 months instead of 2 months. And instead of having a 75% minimum for payroll, they're considering making it 60%. And they're considering making the ability to make the loans longer than 2 years, so to make the repayment slower. So there are all kinds of new iterations going through. And the only thing I can promise you, Barry, is next time we're talking about this, it's going to be different.
That's right. That's right. Well, we shouldn't be surprised since they gave the final guidance on the original PPP at like 10:45 the night before, and they opened it up the next day. So what do you expect? I think this time limit, this 8 weeks on when you have to use the funds, is really a limitation for a lot of folks, because in many states, Ami, they're just not ready to get open for business yet.
Correct. But again, I keep reminding people of the original intent of this legislation. This legislation was never really intended to save companies. It was intended to save jobs. And the intent of it was to create a mechanism through the private sector so that they could save people from the unemployment line. We were almost counting on companies, even if the workers were going to sit home and have nothing to do, almost through goodwill, to be willing to keep their people on payroll.
Well,
But people,
I mean, what we found is that some, especially lower payer workers, are actually making in some states more money.
yeah, that's a tricky part, right? So now one of the new things came out of the new guidelines is that if someone refuses to come back to work, you have to advise the local unemployment office of that, and you should.
Right, right.
So that's one of the things that came back. So there's a lot of tricky nuances to this and it got passed very quickly, and we're not done. The mess isn't over yet.
Right. So let's talk about this FTE test. And again, the idea was that you were going to have similar number of people than you had before this. You weren't going to reduce your head count. But if people don't come back, can you hire your aunt or your uncle to work for you?
So it seems like you can, um, but again, that was never really the intent of the bill.
Right, right.
So that's
I'm just asking these questions because these are the questions they get asked from small business owners.
yeah. And again, I really do think that you should call your accountant or your CPA and get advice. You know, I'm a loan guy,
Right.
Harry. I'm not a accountant or a CPA, and I'm starting to feel a little bit like some of the intricacies of this PPP forgiveness are even above my pay grade. And so I am encouraging people to sit down with their CPA, sit down with their financial advisor, come up with a plan for this, because this is not, unfortunately, not simple stuff.
Yeah, I thought that some of the guidance was good as far as self-employed people because a lot of folks would be confused about that. They said, well, how much can I actually pay myself? And it seems like someone who is a sole proprietor, independent contractor, self-employed can only pay themselves as much as they paid themselves in 2019 on their Schedule C. Is that correct?
Sorry, Barry, run that question one more time for me.
A lot of small business owners are wondering, the owners that are self-employed, right? The people that have no employees, they're independent contractors. They're saying, all right, I know 75% has to go towards payroll. How much can I pay myself? And it seems like that guidance is whatever you paid yourself on your Schedule C, your line 31 profit, that's like the maximum up to that $15,000 limit.
Correct, and that shouldn't be. So if you that should be if you're self-employed, what your application was for.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
So if you were a self-employed person making, as I'm making it up, $60,000 last year, you should have put in an application for $12,500. You should be able to get $10,000 forgiven. And if you had any rent, utilities, or other expenses, you can use those for the $2,500. So for a self-employed person, this should actually be pretty simple.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I think a lot of people think that automatically everything's going to get forgiven. But when they actually go through the calculations, many of the folks that I'm talking with, they actually fall a little bit short.
Exactly right. You're not going to get everything forgiven. But remember, if you don't want to pay back what you didn't get forgiven over a long period of time, you can just pay it off early and be done with it.
And I think that's the thing. Or if you want the loan at 1%, it's okay. One of the other questions that came up yesterday was this idea of I'm a self-employed person, I don't have rent. Can I use my home office exemption or deduction for that? And I've seen people write things both ways on the internet.
I haven't seen anything in the actual guidance that says yes or no. So I expect that ruling will come out over time.
I hope so. Let's talk about what's included in wages. Our wages include taxes and insurance? Is that what's included in wages?
You can't include the taxes that you can pay. You can include the taxes that you pay for the company pays for having that employer, but employee paid taxes are not included.
Right, exactly.
Insurance is included.
Exactly. The other thing that's come up, and I don't know if it's in this HEROES bill, when, let's say you get this thing forgiven, are you still going to be able to deduct those expenses that were forgiven from your taxes as a business expense?
So Barry, again, I'm not a tax guy, and so I haven't exactly been following what's going to go happen. That I know that there was some rulings saying that it wasn't deductible a few weeks ago that upset people, and I haven't seen anything in the new legislation that changes that opinion. The other thing, Barry, that did come up, which is interesting, is that and I don't know if anyone knew this, if you got an EIDL grant, $1,000 to $10,000, that amount will be actually deducted from whatever your forgiveness application is. So if you apply for $80,000 of forgiveness and you got $10,000 of EIDL grant money, your actual forgivable amount will be $70,000, and that $10,000 will be now payable over the balance of the 2 years.
Did that surprise you, Ami, or it made sense since they've been talking all along that they didn't want small business to be able to double dip?
It surprised me a little bit because uh, it surprised me a little bit because it was very it doesn't really make it a grant anymore, and most people got the PPPs, but I understand why they did it. So, but I think that's going to catch some bunch of people by surprise when they go through and do this thing. The other thing that did surprise me a little bit is that the banks have 60 days to process your PPP application, and I get that. But then the SBA has 90 days after the bank submits it to render the final opinion.
Wow.
Okay, so the forgiveness process, at least, and I don't know if the SBA plans to take that full 90 days or do automated decisions for 99% of them and audit 1% of them, or whatever it is they might do. But that's it's going to be a long time before you get your final forgiveness opinion. So people will be out wondering exactly, what is, if they're going to be approved or not for quite some time.
Wow, so that could be 5 months until after I submit my application that I can actually hear that I'm out from underneath this. When do you have to submit the actual application?
Well, I haven't seen anything that gives you a deadline of when you have to submit it by. However, since 6 months after the loan has started, you have to start making payments on it, because payments are deferred for the first 6 months, but then you have to start making payments. If you want to avoid those initial few payments, it's your incentive to get it in as quickly as possible.
So, Ami, you've been following this for a very long time. How do you think the PPP has been implemented? Has it been good for small business owners? Should there be another round? And what changes, if you were king, would you make in this program?
Barry, I don't think there's any clean way to do what they tried to do. And whatever they tried to do would have had problems. And hindsight is 2020. I think everyone had the best intentions. Could there have been easier mechanisms to do this automatically through the payroll companies or things like that? They almost, sometimes it feels like they try to mix apples and oranges and what their goals and their objectives were. And, when suddenly small businesses hear there's a pile of forgivable money, everyone's going to try and get their hands on a piece of it. So again, I think in a pretty quickly amount of time, they accomplished a pretty amazing thing. But unfortunately, I think this forgiveness part is going to be a bigger headache than the first part.
I totally agree with you. Well, I think you're one of the smartest guys in the business trying to help us understand what's going on. Where can people get in touch with you and the folks at Multifunding?
Sure. Anyone's welcome to come to multifunding.com. We have regular seminars going on these topics all the time. And if you come to Multifunding, you can learn about them.
Thanks so much.
Barry, be well and stay safe, okay?
Thank you.